Force on Force features the largest and strongest outdoor military organization in the country. These are the men and women who make it possible to enjoy the freedom to hunt and fish. It is with great pride that we bring you Force on Force podcast, coming to you from the Force on Force Talk.
Hey, welcome to the Force on Force podcast. I'm your host, Shawn Dalrymple. We got a special episode this week. As we talked last week when we were with Eric Sissel talking bow hunting and elk hunting, we were going to have somebody from Lowrance, along with our good buddy Brent Hill, who's on the pro staff. And Brent and I did a podcast earlier in the year talking forward-facing sonar. We wanted to bring in Jeremiah Clark from Lowrance and Navico Group and really dive into this whole forward-facing sonar topic out there. So how you guys doing?
Fantastic. Thanks for having me on here. I'm actually excited to do this. We've talked about it for a long time, and happy to finally get it done. And Brent can stop texting me every time, hey, when you can do this podcast?
So I will let you just officially introduce yourself, Jeremiah. What's your official title? I know you do a lot. We talk.
Yeah, official title is Vice President General Manager. If you ask the people who've known me a long time, like Brent, it's hard to believe, but that's true. You know, Vice President General Manager. I've been with the Lowrance brand, and November will be 15 years. Everything from entry-level job, working my way up as a product manager, did a little stint in sales, and just kind of, progressed my way through and, made it to where I'm at today. More of a strategy role than anything, but it's still a blast.
Yeah, I know. I think that's what's kind of cool because, for one, you have a personal relationship with Brent that goes back a long way, so that makes this conversation an easy conversation to have because that perspective. But I think that's part of what we bring you on here is just your expertise and looking at it from a strategic perspective. Brent and I, we talked a couple of weeks ago, probably, I don't know, more than a couple of months ago to talk forward-facing sonar. Before all this stuff came out with what was the decisions that were going to be made with the three major circuits, what our perspective was. Brent and I are huge electronics guys. We love everything about our Lowrance packages to the forward facing. We're bought in, but that comes back to what I think Brent and I have done in the military because we always have been on the cutting edge and we've kind of embraced that technology because we had no choice the last 20 something years of our career to really be take what you have and learn from it. And so we had a interesting discussion. We discussed really in that podcast was why we felt like there was such a resistance from a consumer standpoint to it. And I think Brent Kirby wrote, it's just that there's a lot of people that don't want to put the time and effort into learning something new out there. And that's kind of what we found. And we talk about this, if we had social media like we do now, would we have had the same kind of discussions back in the 2007, 2008 timeframe that we have in today? And so this social media kind of sped this up on the forward-facing sonar. I think it's here. I love the technology and so forth.
Yeah, it's interesting you talk about the different media available, right? I got to last winter go through and help clean out an old archive we had, and I found some old copies of newspaper articles from the early 1960s talking about the green box and how Daryl and Arlen Lowrance would take people out and say, don't even bother fishing right here because there's nothing to bite. And then the people would put their baits down and not catch anything. And then they'd say right here and they'd get a bite. And the article essentially summed up and it was a kind of a semi quote is that this newfangled technology is pretty cool, but I don't know if I really need it. And to me, seeing that exact same thing, 60 years later, the exact same conversation playing out in a totally different format, still around understanding what's beneath the water, still around trying to figure out how to, kind of go out and understand and better understand the behavior and the patterns of these fish that we've been targeting this whole time. And to see that, I bet you're right. I bet if social media was around in force and when side scan and down scan came out, you'd see the same thing. But it's kind of the same story all the time. It's just the microphone's so much bigger now for those that don't. If you see the size of the sales of this category, it's huge. There are more people that are bought in than aren't bought in. I'll say that.
Yeah. So we're going to dive into that in this podcast. Kind of wanted to set it up, but we kind of wanted to talk about, we've had a long standing relationship with Army Bass, with Lowrance. You guys done so much for us. You guys just helped us out with Fishing for Freedom. That was a fun event, wasn't it, Brent?
Oh, it was great. Always a good event.
So I wanted to kind of read an email we got back to you, Jeremiah, and so you can kind of talk about, how that relationship. But this is an email we got from one of the participants from Fishing for Freedom. And this was actually a boater, so he wasn't a veteran. So it's really cool when you get these kinds. So just kind of put it into perspective, the impact that it makes on everybody, and with our partners like you, how we kind of make this happen. It says, good evening, gentlemen. I can't thank you enough for letting me participate in the tournament this last weekend. I know the tournament is for veterans, and I don't want to take anything away from them, but I had one of the best days on the water I've ever had. Doug McKinney was my non-boater and had absolute pleasure to be with, a true gentleman, someone I will be fishing beside for a long time in the future. I'm asking if you would allow me to fish this tournament again going forward. I know it takes a lot of hard work and something like fishing for freedom. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you.
That's awesome. And that's exactly why you guys do what you do and why we do what we do. I actually want to go back and say, like, all this stuff that, we do for you, but really it's what you do for us. Like, your mission is fantastic. Like, just the presence you guys do, that piece of feedback right there alone was fantastic. And I know we donated some stuff for the cause, but you guys are the ones putting in all the work and gathering all the people and getting these veterans out on the water with these boaters. So really, we probably aren't doing enough, and don't say that when contract negotiations come up, but we probably don't do enough for you guys as much as you do for us, and the visibility you give us and your cause is fantastic.
I know I thought it was pretty amazing piece to kind of read back, because I get a lot of times from a lot of the veterans and stuff that fish the events, but when you hear that from from the boater's perspective about the relationship that he has, I always say those events do as much for the boater perspective that's not a military person than it is to the non-boater veteran that gets to participate, just the impact it has. I mean, it was really, really kind of drives home what we kind of do. I mean, it was really cool. You guys, gave away some stuff. We did a HDS Pro 10 giveaway that it was pretty cool, and a couple of other units. At the New Eagle 9 we gave away, and then the Elite FS 9 that we gave away as part. And a whole bunch. Everybody was too superly excited with all the Lowrance swag that went out to every competitor out there. But it was a really cool event. Just over the years, it's been pretty cool because, we've done some things from, Memorial Day videos for you guys to different things, and just the partnership. I think one of the cool things we talk about relationship, it's just really mine and Brent's ability from our perspective, what we've done in the military really translate really well with working with you guys. Would you agree with that, Brent?
Oh, absolutely. And they're user military friendly. So, I mean, and that's a good relationship there. It's hard to develop those relationships, but when you do, and you find people like Jeremiah and his team, I mean, we can reach out anytime, and Lowrance is going to bend over backwards to help us out. And I think you're right. I mean, we love supporting you guys at Lowrance and spreading the word, because, you'll find that a lot of people don't know how to use their units properly. And, and when we go on the road and we do events and we go to shows and different tournaments and stuff, Shawn and I will find ourselves at Lake Fork sitting in somebody's boat, helping them tune their electronics up. And that comes from knowing you guys and being able to learn from you and then translate that to the end user. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, and that side alone is valuable enough to have your expertise going out to these anglers. But again, what you guys do, getting veterans on the water, bringing some light on that mission and that cause is definitely is where I'm the most proud of what you guys are doing.
Yeah. So we really appreciate it. We wanted to really talk about a little bit about that relationship a little bit, but what we really want to dive into is this whole forward-facing sonar, how it's kind of changed the way anglers approach just fishing, tournaments, and technology, and then just the casual recreational angler out there. I mean, I know for us, I don't even fish anymore if I don't see fish. A crazy story. I'll go back to, we're talking side scan down imaging years, right? I made this transition years ago, and this goes back to my time still on active duty in the 101st Airborne Division. I had the G3 of the 101st Airborne Division who wanted me to teach him how to fish offshore on Kentucky Lake. And this is in the heyday days of Kentucky Lake. And for all the listeners, Fort Campbell, Kentucky is a stone's throw away right there from Kentucky Lake, right? That's some of the most unrestricted training area in the world right there. So it's also some of the best fishing in its heyday, and it's on the way back up. So he said, "Hey, Shawn, I want you to teach me offshore." And I'll never forget, we probably rode around for, a couple of hours. We maybe do a cast here or there. And and I could tell he was getting frustrated. And I just said, "Hey, sir, there's really no point in like us fishing if I can't see him." And it was summertime, classic ledge fishing. And then we saw him, right? When we saw him, we were throwing a 10XD crankbait, and to the point where I was catching two at a time, right? And then like later in the day, like I remember pulling up on a spot and showing him, I'm like, those are big fish right there. And I remember catching a couple of fives off of that. And he go on the ride home, he goes, I get it now. He said it makes like total sense. Like, and from his perspective, for what he did in the military, he understood. For me, it's a lot of, well, me and Brent talk, that's a lot of recon work and a lot of, taking those empty casts. For me and Brent, we don't get a lot of days on the water. So it was really important for this when you get technology started changing, it allowed us to maximize our time in the water. So I talked enough. I wanted you kind of set the stage for you to kind of talk about how Brent and I kind of see it from our perspective.
Yeah. So again, like to talk about today, I got to talk about how we got here, right? And like I was telling you about cleaning out that archive, I found the flyer that came along with the first green box, and the tagline was "Stop Fishing Blindly." And if you look at our website today, it's nowhere to cast, right? So like the idea hasn't changed in, 60, 70 years. Understanding what's going on beneath the water. I loved hearing you talk about using side scan, down scan, and sonar to actually find those offshore fish that are sitting on ledges, because that is why we still put all that stuff in the box, right? Like those are still very powerful tools. Live forward-facing sonar gets all the attention these days, but it is still part of that overall package, and the reason that those tools and techniques are still so important. The difference that you've seen with forward-facing sonar is what you talk about, right? Like is almost maybe a hyper focus on when you do see fish, trying to cast to that fish, understand, what's causing it, triggering it to bite, what's triggering it not to bite, what are they relating to, what kind of. The biggest difference is, I joked when we were first doing forward-facing sonar in 2019, our development was that every time you put a bait in the water, something's going to come look at it, but it doesn't mean it's the right something. It doesn't mean it's interesting, right? So really, the kind of the story you went through there about taking your guest offshore and the hours of just churn and looking for those fish. Forward-facing sonar is really not that any different, right? Like you need to understand what's happening. You need to take the information you're seeing with your eyes, bring it back, adjust the techniques, adjust the baits, figure out if these are fish that are going to bite or not at all, and then move on. What I think kind of as an industry, we've done a really poor job of is we kind of referred to it as video game fishing, and it kind of made it sound like it was just so easy. You put this thing in the water and fish just jump in the boat. And if that were true, my personal best wouldn't have been caught in 05. Like, I mean, but back before even side scan or down scan. It really is the understanding of what's going on and then applying it. So I see a lot of people, I see about kind of you guys talking about not even knowing how to set up their units and not knowing how, the people that put this on their boat and just expect it to be some magic cure-all, just like they thought side scan would be, just like they thought down scan would be. But you see the people that really have it dialed in as a technique are the people that are really out there just, going crazy with it and doing such a good job of understanding what's going on down there.
Yeah, I would say that's a key, because Brent, how many times do we go to places and people like, oh, give me the cheat sheet, man. Like, tell me how to do a quick setup on their stuff. And I think, I know Brent and I both probably say it's like, you want to learn how to use it, take all your rods and reels out of your boat, leave them at the house and go spend a day on the water.
Yeah.
That's what you get. I mean, we call it video. I think you hit a key point. You talked the video game fishing. I think for me, I've learned more probably about fish behavior with it. I hear a lot of controversy out there. People talking about, oh, you got to learn about, everybody needs to learn about what's the big buzzword, fish behavior, migration patterns. I probably learned more because of forward-facing sonar about fish behavior than without it, because it allowed us to see things that we couldn't see before. Have you seen, how do you kind of view that?
It's that, and it's also understanding you as an angler better too, right? So yes, you understand the fish, how they relate to structure. You understand, how fish mostly come up to baits instead of go down to baits. Like you learn that when you cast at a fish, if you don't cast past it and you bring it over its eyes where it can see the bait, it's probably not going to bite. You learn all those things, but you also, you'll learn if they're skittish, if they like your presentation, your color, your retrieve speed. But to me, it taught me as much, it revealed, I wouldn't say it taught, I always knew I was impatient, but it revealed to me that I was a very impatient angler. Like I don't fish finesse very well. I don't fish slowly very well. I'm a kind of run and gun kind of person. So when I was making some of these slower presentations and thinking I'm waiting right or I'm getting it in the right spot or I'm not. I'm so impatient that actually seeing it with my own eyes and watching the bait action and it's responding in real time is almost as important to me as watching the fish. So it's learning really just everything that's going on underneath the water. This is your eyes.
And I think that's important because I say this all the time. You especially see this like when you'll take out like a new fisherman, if it's a jig bite or something, and you're trying to get them to like not move that jig, like just, you like just barely move it. Well, they think they're barely moving and they're moving it like 2 feet, and you're like,
Yeah.
and that's what that forward facing sonar has showed us is like how much the least little bit, how much movement, how far you move that bait down there. And so it's been such a tool to learn from, to casting, to just things about you. I think that was important. I talked about it from fish behavior, but I think that's so important that what you brought up about our own personal retrieve techniques, the things that you learn from that. That's all about bringing in that skill set to make you a better angler from that perspective. I know Brent likes to throw that glide bait a lot, and I know that's probably a big help for you, Brent. And like when you were kind of figuring that whole piece out and you were kind of developing your glide bait, that was kind of a piece that you used that a lot on it, didn't you?
Oh, absolutely. As a bait maker and, making swim baits and glide baits that I do, I can see how fish react to them. So now forward face sonar active target has allowed me to tell the consumer, hey, this is how you need to fish this bait during these certain situations, whether it's burn it, chop it, slow glide it. Keywords there, fish behavior. So yeah, I'm using forward facing sonar to take my bait to a whole nother level that otherwise it'd be just like back in the day where you had to have a cadence with a jerk bait, 1, 2, pause, wait 5 seconds, 1, 2, pause. I can see exactly how the fish is reacting and know the behavior if they're going to bite it or not. And you're absolutely right, Jeremiah. Do not throw a glide bait right on top of a fish because they will swim away from it. You got to throw it past them. So.
Yeah, that's been the other thing. Like that's like learning how far to cast. Well, what you see on the graph is like that's a huge learning curve to like, I think that was the biggest misconception of like if you're going to, especially if they're suspended, how far past them you want to cast to kind of keep them in that depth zone, and kind of working through that. So I've learned so much for it. And but I think it still goes back to forward facing sonar is just a toolkit, right? But it goes back. I tell people all the time this, and it's back to why I use Lowrance because it's the complete system. You got to have good side scan and down imaging to know where I want to fish in the first place, to be able to put the trolling motor down, to use that forward facing sonar, right?
Good charting before you even get the boat off the trailer
Right.
to know where you're going to run to. And like, it's all a total package. And like I say, forward facing sonar, active target, and some of the other brands have definitely taken the spotlight, but they're not the only tool that you need on the boat.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of over. We don't talk about that enough. I sometimes kind of, you mentioned about good mapping. I sometimes kind of, I love the mapping stuff with the C map and what you guys do and being able to color code. For me, I guess I kind of overlook it because I take that for granted. Brent probably does too, because that's something that's like second nature to he and I. I talk to people all the time because our military background, to be able to read topographical maps and dissect that stuff is just unbelievable. Our life's dependent on it, right? I'll share a story. My boys, we were going somewhere and they asked me, they go, Dad, could you go to this place without a GPS? I'm like, yeah, I used to do it every day in Afghanistan, right? I mean, that's how we got around was paper maps, and so you learn to do that stuff. And so it just completes the tool package and how you kind of put it when we talk, whether it's just your tournament fishing or, it's just a fun day out on the water. I don't, everybody's always like, man, I love to do what you do, but I don't get a lot of time in the water. So when I get the time in the water, I like to make it worth my while. My wife doesn't get to spend a lot of time on the water, and she was like, when she does, she's like, "Where are the fish?" She does now. So she asked me, she's like, are there any fish there? She's like, she loves to throw the drop shot. She's like, are there any fish here? You know? And I'm like, so she knows to ask the right question. She may not know what she's looking for, but she's like, she's asking me, so, we're trying to maximize time. So I think that's kind of not just from a tournament, but just a casual time on the water.
Hey, Jeremiah.
Sure.
So Shawn and I brought this up on our last podcast when we were talking about forward-facing sonar, and we were talking about cones and the angle. And a lot of guys, really a lot of people that are out there using forward-facing sonar don't really understand that, and they don't get it. And it's hard or troublesome for them to put their cast in on where they think a fish is. So can you explain the 18 degrees, the cone angle real quick, and kind of go over that?
Yeah, so the current product on the market is 18 degrees side to side. It can vary a little bit in there because there's multiple frequencies in there, but if you take the average of the whole thing, it's about 18 degrees. And that is if you were looking straight out from the front of the trolling motor, if you imagine in your mind's eye like an 18-degree kind of pyramid or triangle coming directly off the front of that trolling motor. The closer you get to it, obviously, the less likely, it hasn't spread out as much, so the less likely you are to hit it. The further out you can cast accurately, the more likely you are to see your bait all the way back through. There are some pros and cons to that kind of narrow cone angle. We find it to be more pro than con, but like our first live sonar actually was a 40-degree wide product, and you could see the bait all the time and you could see the fish all the time, but there was no guarantee that the bait was actually in front of the fish, right? It looks like it is because you're taking a 3D world and you're smashing it into a 2D screen. But there are many times that now that we've got better technology, you could tell if the fish wasn't looking at it, running away from it, or chasing it, they never actually saw that bait. So it showed on the screen at the same time. You could see the bait. But as we've gone to a narrower cone angle, you get higher resolution. You get these picture-like, video-like images. But two, when you see a fish and you see that bait and you see them on the screen at the same time, you know that they're in the same spot. And so if you're making the right presentation or the right cast. So we're 18 degrees side to side. Again, if you kind of put that pie wedge off the front of your trolling motor, and we're 135 degrees front to back. So that's basically the water surface in front of you, back to 45 degrees, 35 degrees back behind the transducer itself. So a little bit behind where you're actually at. So you have a little bit of rear view as well in forward-facing sonar. And then you can take those and point them in different directions. So we've got the forward mode. If looking straight out, you could face it down, which is kind of the crappie mode, or you can put it in scout mode, which is kind of that overhead perspective. But in scout mode, now you're taking the 18 degrees instead of it being side to side. You're now top to bottom 18 degrees.
Yeah, they each have their own tool set when you use them. I really like the scout mode when I'm in and around like Gunnersville on the grass. When you're shallow grass fishing, you find those little pre-spawn, you find those shell beds in the edge of grass. That's where it comes into perspective. But most of the time I'm in that forward like Brent is. I talk about this. I think this is a big misconception. I tell people it's kind of the same thing. Well, what are your settings? Well, every setting's different, but it's the same thing when we talk about you guys put the notches on the forward-facing brackets, but those are just starting points. You have to kind of tweak it based on how it sits on whether you have it on a tort or on the trolling motor, because not every trolling motor sits the same on every bow and all that.
Yeah, they're designed to. The ideal of the trolling motor is pointing perfectly perpendicular to the water, right? But that's not totally true.
Right.
So there is a click or two in between there, and you can play with that. For the most part, those are kind of just meant to be the quick guides. Another thing, you talk about settings, and I was thinking this when Brent was talking about side scan and down scan setups and all that too, right? Out of the box, we try to make our product just work. We don't really want you to have to be a sonar engineer with 30 different levels of setting. Really, most of the stuff that we focus on is how you view it. Some people like a nice, crisp, clean image where you can see the shadows. And some people turn the volume all the way up so that way every little thing just glows. Really, whatever works for you works for you. But out of the box, we aim to just be kind of turn it on and go for the average user. So like a lot of people ask me, the same question. What do you run this on? Auto +2, auto -4. Like I usually do almost everything in auto and then bias it up and down based on how I personally want to see it.
No, I agree with you, Jeremiah. I get that question a lot. When I give them that answer, they look at me like, really? I'm like, it's out of the box, man. I don't have to adjust it. It works. And I get to fish a lot of different places across the country, and it doesn't you don't have to mess with it. It's the simplicity, ease of use. Or like I was in a boat before fishing for freedom, and I'm like, you don't need this, you don't need that, you don't need this screen. It's like, we're gonna make it simplicity, like out of the box. Here's what you need. Here's what, because it's so functionality, even with the down scan, the side scan, the mapping, you name it, and then you throw the forward facing sonar. I get really simplicity out there, and so
Yeah.
I just know that is. And when we talk the transducer piece, I get a lot of questions about, well, and I go back to Brent. I'll give you this. We talked the 50 cal when we're downrange. It's called head spacing timing. You actually take the timing, and so you can adjust it plus or minus one on each side of that to fit what you're trying to do. And that's what I kind of think about with that, because every boat I've kind of had to, like, depending on how the trolling motor was mounted, just because a little bit of tweak, and that's the only that's the small perspective I've ever had to do with it. I mean, that's
trolling motors don't point straight down, so if you need to get that click in between the two clicks, go for it. What I do when I see this on people's boats, I automatically go grab their transducer, even if they don't know who I am, is when they have it pointed like at the sky. You're not giving yourself anything there but if you're not seeing the surface of the water, you're not seeing that jerk bait splash, chances are your trolling motor is angled slightly backwards from perpendicular, and go ahead and give it that one click up.
Here's the other one. I'll get some FaceTime calls and be like, man, look at my screen. And like 9 times out of 10, I'm like, take the trolling motor out of the water. And they got the transducer turned upside down. And I'm like, well, that's what you got. And I'm like, take the transducer and flip it around and you'll be good. And
gonna show you where you're looking.
It's going to show you where you're looking. And half the time they're like, I'm like, you're not looking, it's flipped upside down. So I'm like, just make sure you got it right, deal. So, you guys with that forward facing sonar have done such a good deal, but we've got a lot of stuff with the industry changing from bass to major league fishing to not NPLF that have made some kind of major decisions. It's not just going to affect you guys, but it's going to affect everybody in the sonar industry out there. And how do you guys kind of see it shaping the sonar? Because first of all, it's an impact to the entire industry, not just to Lowrance deal.
Honestly, kind of first reaction was not great, but then as I kind of sat there and digested it and thought it through, I think it actually gives us a chance to kind of reset and restart the conversation. Because I was telling you that as an industry, we really let it be called video game fishing when it's really not. It's actually a technique. And I think with some of these changes, especially in the series that still allow the product, it allows us to focus on those different techniques when the product's being used and when it's being highlighted, thinking specifically like major league fishing, right? When you have to declare your use of the product, we can actually see head to head how fishing happens with and without it. Like what are catch rates, what are catch quality. We've never actually had that metric before, but I really to change that narrative of not only when forward facing sonar is being used, on how it's being used as a technique, why it's being used, is almost an educational piece, but when it's not being used, okay, now what's being used? Because I've been a sonar nerd for a while, right? So I still love traditional sonar, chirp sonar. I still love down scan and side scan. And to your point about ledge fishing and finding them on side scan and then locating them with your chirp sonar, like that is still a very powerful technique if used, if you know how to do it. So I think it allows us to take some of the spotlight off of forward facing sonar, but when the spotlight is on it, allows us to use it as more of an educational piece and get people a little bit more engaged on the why and how it's being used, so much just it's this magical thing that fixes everything and makes anglers fantastic, because that's really not the truth.
Well, I think you brought up it gets into, I haven't really thought about, but it's going to put people into the decision-making cycle. We have a term we call it a OODA loop, right? It comes from fighter pilots, right? That's where that term comes from. Brent and I have probably heard that term tons during Command and General Staff College, but we're going to get to see it kind of play out in real life, because not just that, for us, to put it in Brent and I's perspective, what that equates to is when you're downrange, not all assets are available to you at all times. So you have to plan, and it plans into your decision-making cycle. And whoever's going to get into that best decision-making cycle to use the tools at the proper time for what they need, Yeah. I think that I haven't even thought. Have you thought about it from that perspective, Brent? Like,
no, now I just did now. Like, hey, maybe on this mission you don't have air support, so Things we're going to do things a little different on this, or hey, you may have air support, but you don't have a JTAC or a forward observer with you. How are you going to do this? So everything's going to have to be a decision for these different bass tournament trails for sure. And some guys are going to probably switch. You'll see some switching going on as far as who's fishing on what are the top 3 circuits, right? So
Yep.
people are going to change around, I think.
I've heard some of that too, and I can't go into any of that, but with the MLF, when it gives us a chance to actually spotlight and focus on the technologies being used or it's not being used, with bass limiting the kind of the number of screens and the number of transducers being able to use, like when you look at kind of the consumer base and you do surveys or you go scrub social media, not only the comments but the frequency of them, whatever else, and you look at the sales trends, right? Overwhelmingly, the consumer has embraced this technology. There are 2 groups of people that don't love it, and there are very valid reasons for not loving it based on the data we can pull out. One is the people or the group that just don't like the way what it's done to fishing in terms of, again, it's just staring at a screen, you're making a cast, you're doing all those other things. And if that technology is not right for that angler, that's okay. We've still got a whole suite of products that, go back and teach them how to find fish, and maybe what you could call more traditional ways. The other area we've seen is kind of really, I think and they haven't really kind of came out and told this to us, but what I interpret Bass is saying is the barrier to entry that the average boater is seeing what it takes to be their hero, right? Like, so bass fishing is an aspirational sport, just like golf or NASCAR or whatever else. You look up, you see your hero, you want to emulate them, you want to use the toys they're using. And when somebody's got 5 screens and 3 sonar, 3 live sonar transducers and all these other things, and there's $30,000 worth of electronics, you think maybe this isn't the sport for me. So what I've seen Bass doing is kind of getting it back to that accessibility and the relatability of it. So I don't think that's a bad thing at all. And we've even attacked that recently with some new entrants into our entry level segment we'll talk about a little later.
Yeah, I think that's a good, valuable point. I mean, I talk about this all the time. Brent and I's boat are always like decked out like what we call our go to war package. But my go to war package is not ever been on like 5, 6, 7. I've always, the most, I'm talking 212s at the front. I've always wanted to go to 210s at the front, right? And then a 116 at the console, because I've had everything I've needed in that. But even then, I mean, I can't tell you, like, working Bass Pros, how many Elite FS units I've sold to customers, because first of all, I always ask the customers, what are you trying to do? And I always say, from a consumer standpoint, that Elite FS does everything that my Pro does. Just doesn't have quite the glass, glare protection when I can stand anywhere in the boat. Some other little things you're giving up on HTM. There's a few things that but if you're like, you don't have to. I've always told people, you don't have to have that expensive package. I can still get forward facing sonar with it. I can still do all that. And I think that arms race was it is a kind of a real deal out there. It had kind of been that ugly that nobody kind of wanted to talk about.
Yeah. And that you called out something very good with the Elite FS, is that there's a reason we make so many different products at different price points, right? It's how often you're going to go use it, what's the boat, and then kind of what's your budget, right? And so we try to attack all those different areas. But yeah, I like that. That's a good term. I'm going to steal that and use it going forward, the arms race, because that's what it turned into, right? Like, these boats were, you couldn't even get on and off of them anymore. So I think that part, I mean, would I love to sell 516s to every angler? Sure, that'd be great for me personally. I'd, go buy that Porsche I've always been wanting. But it's not a reality. It's not what the average person can afford. And it's really, honestly, not what everybody needs.
No, I think that's a pretty good deal. And that kind of talks about, what was with the 3 circuits, how they kind of decisions and what's kind of going forward. You've kind of brought up some key things that, with everybody's talking about all the other stuff, but from you guys' perspective, those are things that I hadn't really kind of thought about, like the things we're going to kind of learn from that perspective to entry. And really, I think some good perspective on both of them. As we talk about forward-facing sonar, we kind of just alluded to it, talking about this with the arms race piece. What did it mean to the casual recreation angler? And we're going to kind of talk about like that some of the stuff that you're kind of doing from that budget perspective that everybody can kind of get into, because I think that's important. You guys do a great job of bringing that perspective. I've always said this too, like, what's what I really loved about what you guys did at Lowrance. You made everything that could hook up. You didn't have to buy, when you guys came out with forward facing sonar, you didn't have to buy a completely brand new unit. You made some things that were backwards compatibility so that it can make it ease of use for the consumer out there.
Yeah, most of our anglers don't replace the whole boat at one time, right? Like they'll add a unit because it gives them a new piece of technology, and they'll slide a unit from the bow to the console. They'll take the unit that used to be on the console and they'll give it to their son or their brother or their whatever. And so like there is, if you look at a typical non-pro sponsored, boat, like there's 2, 3, 4 sometimes generations of product on that boat. And so it's not always possible, but we do try to make it backwards compatible as possible, right? You run into technology limitations, processing power, memory, all that stuff. And at a certain point, things just, you can't go back very far, but it is a very conscious effort we make to try to say, here's the new toy. And yeah, just because you bought your screen 5 years ago, you can still play. It's definitely top of mind when it comes to our product development.
Yeah, I think so. You guys have come out with the new Eagle. We're not talking, but you guys have the new Eagle line that's out, which really goes back to the roots of what Lowrance has done. More that entry level product to get guys on the water. It gives you that capability to do side and down imaging and a non-touch screen function, but you still do everything that you need to do for somebody.
I will say that when I joined 15 years ago, the idea of a fully functioning side scan, down scan, chirp sonar with built-in CMAP charting and a 9-inch screen was just, no, that would never would have happened. That was a premium HDS product, right? So one of the things we also try to do is take some of these premium technologies and figure out how to get the cost, affordability, and size the packages that it's kind of more for the everyday angler and not necessarily for the tournament pro. And so with the Eagle, that's kind of the goal there is simple, easy to use, bright screens you can see with, polarized sunglasses. The best sonar technology for the money. Is it the best on the market? No, but for the money you're going to pay, it's really, really good. And then kind of expanding that and tying back into our earlier conversation around forward-facing sonars, we have the new Eagle Eye. That is a forward-facing sonar. So you can get forward down, or you can get live forward, live down scan, chirp sonar, and CMAP charting in a 9-inch screen for $1,000. So when we talked about going out and doing a lot of consumer research and trying to figure out why the detractors don't love live sonar, and I said there's a really big portion of people that felt the barrier of entry was too high. Like, can I go out and spend 15 grand on all these toys? I can't. Not many can. But could I, if I was a weekend angler and I, wanted to just add this technology and get a little taste for it for $1,000? Yeah, I can afford that. It may take a little convincing in the budget, and talking to the wife and all that, but I can, we can make that happen. And so we're really going after that access and that availability with that product. And so far the pre-order book has been overwhelmingly positive, and people are super excited about being able to get the technology that used to only be reserved for the pros now in the hands of every one of us.
I think you guys are kind of going to be the first one in that market to kind of hit that price point. And I think that's going to be huge because I know that I've done a lot of stuff with Bass Pros or Cabela's or different events for you guys. And that, like you said, that's always the deal. I mean, you're looking at, you got to spend, just to buy a transducer in a box, you're spending, $1,700 on something like that with taxes and everything. And so
if you buy a closeout screen and a closeout live sonar system, you're still $2,200.
Right. And so that's where that's going to get a lot more people into to that aspect of it. How do we get that entry level where they don't want to spend as much, but they still want to dabble into it type deal and still have a great ability to use that technology in a form factor that's affordable to everything. Just like everything, you guys always try to keep the angler in mind. I think that's very important, and that's why I say it doesn't really matter whether it's tournament angler or it's the everyday practicability. You guys kind of figured that out because that's really that affordability issue, and that's really now we can be like not have to have that whole piece of are you really not wanting to do it because it's an affordability, so you're using all these other pieces. So now we're getting it down because everything is a deal for it. I know for us, I mean, forward facing sonar is really for for me and Brent and the guys at Army Bass, it's just a tool that we're going to use. I mean, we're going to talk about it. It's part of our toolkit. I mean, I don't think we don't ever go anywhere, and I'm not trying. Here's my personal one thing I'll just share with listeners. One reason I love forward fishing sonar is this: I can go to a new lake in a new part of the country and start catching fish almost immediately because of a lot of the things that we talked about. Because you take the side scan down imaging, and then I can study fish behavior and how my fish relate to my baits. I don't know that with forward facing sonar, I would have the confidence to go do that, with a little bit of time that we have sometimes,
Yeah.
And I think that's been a big, like, I love about forward facing sonar. What's your thoughts on it, Brent?
Well, I mean, I think it completed the puzzle for me. So obviously, I'm just like Jeremiah and you, 2D, chirp, down scan, side scan, used it for years, understand it, know how to implement it. Forward faces sonar really closed the loop on it and completed the puzzle for me. Now it makes sense. Things started clicking. That's why I'm catching them on that side of the tree. That's why I'm catching them off the bluff wall like this during this time of year. Things start making sense. And then obviously we've already kind of talked about it, but fish behavior, it really helped put the pieces of the puzzle together. Am I still like awesome at it and like really good and out there cashing checks every weekend? No. But can I go out and catch some fish? Absolutely. In a lot quicker manner, more efficiently. And I think what that does for the conventional fisherman, the recreational angler, is it saves some time, because not everybody has time to just go get on the water, So I love it. I'm going to continue to use it unless Shawn bans me. Right.
Yeah. I don't see that happening, and Jeremiah, I tell you, Brent and I would love to. That's one of the things that Brent and I look forward to, if we could ever get time, is actually getting out and teaching some of this on the water. I mean, that's what Brent and I really love to do. And Brent's still in active duty, and I just would want to run in Army Bass Hunters. It gets hard for me to get out there and do it, but that's something that we look forward to in the future. Hopefully that's something that we're able to get out and kind of teach how we can do electronics type stuff. And that's what we're kind of leaning forward, because it's just a tool piece, because we do get asked that question all the time. How can I use my electronics? And it's back to that question, back to the answer I always give them. Take all your rods and reels out of your boat, go spend a day on the water, learn, because there's a true story to the listeners. I came back from Afghanistan in 2007, went to Captain's Career Course and finished up Captain's Career Course, and knew I was going to go to grad school. And I grew up basically a bait fisherman my whole life and with my dad. And I made a point that I was going to learn how to fish offshore. And that's when the first HDS units came out. And so that was the year of the very first HDS units. And I just spent hours and hours on the water. And I love that people think, oh, just give me it was just like, there were times where I just spent hours on the water and teaching people, or teaching myself how to do this. And people want to be like, give me the quick guide. And so I think it's going to be, as we go forward and as these technologies have come about, people are going to have to understand. I think one day of you taken away from your fishing and learning your electronics on your boat are going to make the whole rest of your fishing days throughout the year worthwhile. Whether it's tournament. Yeah.
So I think there's a good transition point here to talk about, is that I really like what MLF did with high school, because it's going to teach them how, because they can't use forward face sonar, right? So I think it's going to teach these high school anglers how to be a traditional fisherman, understand how to fish the traditional way, right? Without using forward facing sonar. And I think what that's going to do is, like, we had to learn all the tools in the toolkit minus forward facing sonar. It's going to teach them how to use their CMAP, how to use their side imaging and their 2D and downscan sonar. And then when they make it to that next level, they can implement another piece out of their toolkit and use forward face sonar. And I think it'll make these younger generation of anglers better, in my opinion.
I agree with that. And I think it ties back into, if you think of charting, I'll throw the CMAP plug out there, but if you just think of charting in general, how good it's gotten across all the brands, if you think about how good side scan's gotten across all the brands, those are, as you put earlier, Shawn, those are your reconnaissance tools. That's how you know where to go, right? You don't just get off the ramp, put down forward-facing sonar, and it automatically drives you to the spot the fish are, right? You still have to have that background. You still have to have the understanding based on weather, current, wind patterns, all these other things, where these fish are going to likely be sitting. You use your other electronics to confirm that they're there, and then you use your actual forward-facing sonar or active target to actively target those fish. Like, it is an active process. It's not a search tool where everything else is either search or, kind of pre-game stuff. This is the tool you use while you're doing it. So I love your point, Brent, about teaching people how to use the other pieces, because if you take away all those other pieces and you just rely on this one tool, you're not going to be able to put the puzzle together.
Well, you may every once in a while, but you're not going to be consistent, and you're not going to be where you need to be in your game to go to the next level, and you'll see some failures on that part. But if I think it's in a step in the right direction for the younger anglers, in my opinion. And some people have disagreed with me on that, but I mean, I grew up throwing out, fishing from the bank, and then a 2-man, and then a John boat, and then a fiberglass boat. Most of those didn't have any sonar on it. We had a fishing pole, and I knew it was 6 feet deep, right? So look at where we're at now. And I think it's awesome to see the evolution of technology and really the leader at Lowrance and where you guys have taken it to. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, I agree. Hey, Jeremiah, as we wrap this up, I know you can't talk about too much, but you guys have any cool stuff you guys working on future?
Yeah, what's new, man? Tell us what's new.
Always new stuff. We've got a team of awesome engineers. I'd say the best engineers in the industry. I'm not just saying that to butter them up, but we really do have the best engineers in the industry who are always trying to figure out ways to solve customer problems. We are an angler-centric, angler-focused organization. Everything we're doing is made for the angler. So looking at kind of some of you take the direction of a forward-facing sonar, an anchoring trolling motor, all these other things that we've CMAP charting, high-resolution charting, that have kind of changed the industry over the last 5-10 years. But really, you start to look for kind of the unmet needs. And I'm going to not answer your question, but it's a fancy way of not answering your question, is that, with forward-facing sonar, live sonar, active target, as popular as it is, I don't think it's still fulfilling everything it can do. So we're going to keep investing in that space. We've talked about plenty in the call. There are people that don't love it, and there are plenty of people that do love it. And the demographics say there's far more than love it that don't love it. But for those that don't love it, we're not going to stop working on other things as well. Our goal is to be the best in sonar. So that's where we're at. That's what we're going to keep investing in. And that's pretty much Lowrance. Most of our sales come through the sales of HDS or LeadFS displays, but really it's these technologies, the sonar, the cartography, the vessel integration, that are the reasons you want our display as opposed to somebody else's. And that's a really vague way of not answering your question, but that's probably the closest you're going to get out of me tonight.
Yeah, we know that. We know, because we trust us. We worked where we worked at. What we do for the military, we get asked a lot of questions, and so, but it's it is a good way to answer it, that you guys' commitment to really keeping the consumer first and the fisherman focused initiatives out there. And I think that's what the listeners can take away from what you guys are working on in the future. Hey, we appreciate, Jeremiah, you getting on and discussing all this with us. It's a fun discussion. Brent, always fun having you on here. Just a great time. Brent is wrapping up the end of his military career, and so I know that he is looking for the next exciting portion of his life. So, great to always have Brent on here.
I'll go work for Lowrance. I'll be Jeremiah's driver.
Well, give me a call when you're done. I could use somebody with some strategic abilities.
Yeah. So, hey, we appreciate everybody. If you want to know more about Army bass, buck, duck, or hog, go to forceonforcetv.com. And hey, we appreciate it. Cool.
Thanks for listening to the Force on Force podcast. Join us next time as we dive into more topics from the Force on Force talk. For more information or to learn how to join the organization, visit our website at forceonforcetv.com.